Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Well, we've all had adversity. Not one of us, as they say, gets out of childhood unscathed. Some of us are born with a silver spoon in our mouth. Some of us are born with a wooden spoon in our mouths. And some of us are born with no spoon in our mouths. And whatever our circumstances, there's always something we can do about it. And I am very happy to introduce to you as my guest, Dr. Marilyn Simmons Bowe, who is an author, a world traveler, a long-distance runner, who specializes in coaching and teaching on social emotional learning. And her book is entitled Motivation by the Mile. Motivation by the mile, inspiration for everybody. So, Dr. Marilyn, a very interesting play on words.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Duffy, and thank you. I came up with that actually while out on a run, because one of the things that I do while running is take pictures. And I had the idea of putting my thoughts at the moment as well as what I was experiencing in my life at the moment within each picture and presenting that in a book. And so that's why I came up with the coffee table style, full color picture book, Motivation by the Mile.
I'm glad you made mention, Dr. Marilyn, that it's coffee table style, because it's quite large and it's full of gorgeous pictures, which is what we want on a coffee table to distract our guests when we're late getting them something to eat. But I love coffee table books, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I love the fact that it's so multi-layered, the fact that you are both a photographer and an author and someone who is so well educated, bringing yourself up by your own bootstraps, and of course the visceral being the runner. So it's, you know, I'm a holistic therapist, body-mind therapy. I'm not just a talk therapist. And it's always about being fully embodied.
Yes.
You know, living in your body. And I think that females who are athletic have a real leg up, no pun intended.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, studies have indicated that girls who are athletes feel much more confident in life in general.
Yes.
So you talk about how you were a regular society housewife mother, and some guys were going running all the time. And I go with you. Oh no, not really. You don't know what you're doing.
Right.
And then you gradually, post by post, built yourself up into being a fabulous long-distance runner.
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, the guys felt as though, because this is when I was in the Bahamas in the late 80s, and the guys felt as though I would not be able to keep up with them for two reasons. One, because they were faster than me, more experienced than me, actually. And two, because of the heat of the day in the Bahamas, they would go out super early in the morning when it was dark. Well, little did these guys know that I had already run that race, pun intended, because as a teenager, I was the first girl allowed in my chemistry class in high school, because girls were discouraged from being in science because we would discourage the boys. And so I had already fought that fight. And so I would struggle and I would be well behind them. And then there was this one kind gentleman, he would do loops back and forth until I got the pace.
Oh.
And eventually I was running with them. And as you talk about your work, Dr. Duffy, with social psychology, yes, these were examples in my very earliest life as to how we can socially uplift each other with the kindest, little things. And that's what happened with what I did in the book. I looked at all of the hurdles that I was involved with, past, present, and possibly future. And I found ways to let those be, as people would say in church, a testimony, or in everyday life, just a social foundation to tell someone else, it's okay. If you experience something like this, you will be okay, because here is what I have gone through.
What I have gone through. And I just want to share the conflict that I'm experiencing right now in talking about your success, Dr. Marilyn, because in America, there is a rags to riches myth, right. Rags to riches, Horatio Alger. And many people think that they have the right to judge poor people for being poor with the assumption that they don't work hard enough and they're lazy. So now that doesn't mean that there isn't a real thing as a rags to riches story, which is yours, coming from being very poor, living in Nassau, the Bahamas, and literally through education, and, as you say, through people, through social support, that you were able to become the person that you are. Now, I noticed a few themes in your book. Of course, you talk so much about hope, and you talk so much about thriving as we help others thrive. You talk about concern for others. Now, for me, as a clinician, as a therapist, I know that one of the main goals of therapy is not only self-compassion, but compassion for others and concern for others. And a lot of people don't make that connection, that our success needs to be in concert with caring and helping, as you say, others uplift. I love that word. Socially uplift each other. So do you hear, Dr. Marilyn, my concern about not rah-rah-rahing? Anybody can do it. Dr. Marilyn Simmons Bowe did it, so anybody can do it. But what we want to do is we want to look at the particular variables in your life and how you did it, how you became who you are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duffy. And the rags to riches, the richest part of it for me is not measured in a financial bottom line. I'm far from that. The richest for me is measured in who I have helped along the way. And there are some who say, you are too giving. You're never going to be here, there, or you're never going to get this or that because you're too giving. But that's how I got to where I was. When I graduated high school at the age of 15, my mother at the time was a single parent raising 8 kids as a domestic worker, barely making $30 an hour. We lived in the little shack that I picture in my book in the very first section. And one of the things that we knew was that even though my mother never made it past 3rd grade, we had to go to school every day. And in going to school, I lapped up everything that I could. Of my mom's 8 children, 4 of us were academically inclined, 4 of us were not. And that's when I got my first idea about what is it that makes us different. And as a 3rd grader, I remember thinking, wow, my sister wants to be out just climbing trees and playing, and there was nothing wrong with that, but I always wanted to have my head in the book. Why were we so different? And I started looking at differences from then. And so to speak to your conflict, this is where the paths diverge for many people, is because we wait too late to figure out who and how we are, or we don't listen. And that is one of the mottos that I used in my coaching, is that it's not what we are, but who and how we are. And even in the misery of food insecurity, and sometimes going to bed hungry, and neighbors giving us stale bread, and I'm having to give to my younger sisters because they're still hungry. I would just go into a book and escape. And then there was someone down the street that had Archie comics. And I remember I would see this thing, pizza, and I was like, one of these days, I'm going to taste pizza. And it wasn't until after I graduated high school, they started College of the Bahamas for us very impoverished kids who would never be able to go off to university anywhere. And they would have college socials. And I remember almost to the day, the summer of 1978 is the first time that I tasted pizza. That was the beginning of my rags to riches. And so everybody does have a different path to rags to riches, but it's about what we see as value. Because if we see ourselves as the most valuable thing that we can give, then we will always work on ourselves towards that rag to riches and be the who and the best who and how we are, as opposed to the what of it. The people who strive for the what's in the rags to riches stories are the ones who are left most empty, most invalidated. Because what do you do after you take away the periphery of the physicalities?
Wow. I love that you said that you offer something of value, and that is you. That is so beautiful, Dr. Marilyn. How did you, well, first of all, let me recap what you said, because I think that education is a huge way out. And of course, we know that we don't have higher education accessible to everyone. We're trying to move toward that. Enlightened members of our society are trying to move toward that. But education, I think, is key. And the fact that your mother was so pro-education, and that you actually witnessed that half of you as siblings were academically inclined and half of you weren't. So you actually saw that contrast, and that you knew that whatever was going on, you always could read your book. You always had a book. And that's how I managed in my childhood. You know, I came from a blue-collar neighborhood. I was a lonely kid. But every in the summertime, I didn't have a lot of people to play with. I was not athletically inclined as you were. I was a little chubby kid, but I would take my bicycle a mile or two to the library and get books, and I would read one book a day as a child. And in my 20s, a very dear, loving mentor said to me, nobody can ever take your books away from you. So now not everybody is so academically inclined or interested, but you were, and it was your saving grace. It did really help you. So I wanted to just recap that, because I think that's so important. Yes. And the other major point is it's not what you have, but who you are, and all of these other things. Conspicuous consumption that so many people have, the looking good family. Let me look perfect in my dress. Let me have the most expensive car, the most expensive watch, and lie to myself that I'm really okay. And other people believe that I'm okay. And that is so not you. And how did you know this, besides being academically inclined and half of your siblings were not?
Well, my mirror was my eldest sister, my mother's eldest child. And I noticed that the escape in the books was her saving grace. And so I mirrored that. But as I grew older, I realized that people were making choices to acquire things. And as I observed this, I realized that those choices weren't necessarily negative as far as the outcomes, but they seemed to be negative as far as what they were doing to the person. It was the dog-eat-dog kind of approach, where I grew up watching these people who were so nice and kind, but as they got to a place where they can acquire stuff, they just became vicious. Like, I don't care about you. This is what I want. And I was just speaking with someone the other day, because most of the people that I went to high school and college with are actually leaders in my country and were leaders in my country for the past 20 odd years. And they all said to me, well, why don't you come home and be a politician? And you can get this and you can get that. And I said, but what are we doing for the people? I said, if you remember, before we became independent, if someone hadn't done, talk about the social support, if someone hadn't said, let's put these things in place for a new country, the Bahamas, for these children, where would we be? We would not have had that opportunity. And so when you talk about the acquisitions, there are people who just went towards the acquisition. And I was ridiculed. I would get beat up. There's a section in my book where I have a picture of St. James Baptist Church. And I would sit on the church porch at night because they left the lights on, and I could read and also hide because there was a graveyard near the church, and a lot of people were afraid of the graveyard. And so to me, that was my saving grace. Now, when I tell these stories and having written the book, it's like, oh, well, you were always smart. Oh, so you wrote a book. So even now, the validation piece is what I find that is not a part of my rags to riches story if I look externally in a broad fashion. And that's what makes me constantly focus on validating / supporting others. Because as you said, no matter what you get, no matter how fancy that car is, if you're empty inside, you're always going to feel lesser than who and how you can do.
Wow. I obviously appreciate it and share your values. And I'm just, trying to understand how this happens, how some people can develop like you, caring about others simultaneously with caring about self, wanting to uplift others as you uplift yourself. It's always the and, it's not the but, it's both. It's both. And other people can get caught up so much in the materialistic culture and really believe that their success is based upon their acquisitions and how much money they make. So I have a clue when you say that your mother, for $30 a week, was able to support 8 children as a domestic worker, and who really wanted you to value education. And probably really talked about that a lot. And then you being academically inclined, and you had an older sister who was very nurturing toward you. And you had people in your area who ridiculed you, but that one guy looped around so as to help you.
Yes.
So you experienced a lot of different things, and how you became you. Your emphasis so much in your book, it's not the what, it's the who I am, how I develop myself as a person. As a social psychologist, I know that so many of us, we are all culture bound. Mm-hmm. We're products of our culture. Now, luckily in America, we have a diverse culture. It's not monotone. So we can see some obvious choices. Yet there are things in the ethos that a lot of people don't recognize. The fact that our history is that of the frontier. Even though we didn't experience the frontier directly, that belief that in America, we had this vast continent to exploit. When I grew up, we thought of it as exploration. And it's to exploit, explore and exploit, to be fair. And so we could afford to be individualistic, every man for himself, because there was such a huge quantity of fertile land. Whereas in China, they had very rocky land, and they had to get together in groups to take literally axes to break up the rocks, to create some sort of arable land. So they learned to be group involved, that they needed each other. We came from the such fertile land that we could afford to. Every man for himself was the dictum. Mm-hmm. And even though that's not the case today, that's still in our ethos. And so why should I help others, right? I have to keep my own head above water to help myself. I don't have the resources or even the care to help others. And by the way, survival of the fittest, they're not doing as well as me because they're not worthy, because they're not working as hard. You see, that's what I mean about being culture bound. What is your take on that? Now, you weren't raised in the States, right? How old were you when you moved out of Nassau, the Bahamas?
I left Nassau at 17 for Freeport, which is where I had my young adult life. But I moved to the United States at the age of 31 to go back to college, and 33 as a single parent with 2 kids. But to address your point about being culture bound versus not being culture bound, survival of the fittest, etc., this is where I got the impetus for my work long before I even knew that I would do the work. And it was something that was just simmering in the back of my mind. So when I finally ventured into my PhD work in the early 2000s, I wanted to do a self-design study, and they were like, well, what's wrong with what we have already? I said, because I've been carrying this stuff around all of this time about how people interact and how some achieve and how some don't, and how 4 of my mom's kids were academic and 4 were not. And I came up with this idea, and then my master's degree work is in biomedical sciences, focusing in neuroanatomy, neurophysiology. So I became so enthralled with the interactions between the cerebrum, the thinking centers, and the amygdala, the feeling centers. And I realized that's what I was looking for. So I did a self-designed quantitative study looking at the effects of emotions on achievement. And that helped me to understand and possibly provide answers to anyone who sought help, but also to people who I interacted with, whether they came to me as a client or not. Because in my work, I realized that we are a product of 3 main areas of the brain: our thinking centers, our feeling centers, and our survival centers. The survival centers, the cerebellum, the back of the brain. We are just like, we're breathing, we're trying to get food, we have satiety centers, etc. Now, in our thinking centers, we've learned that, hey, if I can afford it, I'm going to have lobster and steak. But in our feeling centers, we're like, what do I feel like eating today? And to use that in the sense of social emotional learning. Social emotional learning is how we interact, communicate, and respond to each other. So in the frontier days, to use your analogy, when we were, quote unquote, exploring, and then we realized now it was exploitation, the words explore and exploit come from the same root word as explode. We're going out in some way to find something, to break something, not necessarily to create something. And so when people understand that in order for you to truly have a positive social experience, you have to be willing to explore yourself, to explode within yourself so that you can then give that back to society. Unfortunately, we have that 1% who says, I don't care how many zeros you need to qualify my worth, I'm going to keep looking for zeros. Then you have people like me who some think that I'm a zero because like, if I were you, I would have this and I would have that and I would do this and I would do that. And I said, I believe in the whole concept of humanity. Therefore, if humanity is only going to afford me the opportunity to pay my bills, then that's what I will take from humanity in this moment, because I refuse to exploit or explore or explode into humanity in a way that's going to violate others. And that's what the Chinese got when they were working in the heaps with the stones, as opposed to the Europeans who were constantly looking for something more. When they circumnavigated the globe to get out, to get down, to get to South America, to get, well humanity as a whole, Homo sapiens. But when we got into a place where we can call this a culture and a society and have a class system, that's where the breakdown came. I'm doing a compilation now, and I've gone all the way back to someone called Robert Thomas Malthus. And Robert Thomas Malthus was someone who was around in England in the 1800s when they had the poor laws. The poor laws of England were designed to make the rich feel okay about getting rich, because what the poor laws said was, don't worry, we'll take care of you. We don't want you to aspire to do much of anything. We'll take care of you. And that's what I rose against, because the Bahamas is a British colony, and we were supposed to be content being farmers and tourists. There was nothing wrong with that. Working in the tourism industry, domestics, restaurants, etc. There was nothing wrong with that, but I felt that if I had a brain that wanted to do more, why not let it do more? And that is how we as humankind can do better with our frontier mentality and get more into the let's get together and break a pile of rocks mentality.
You're amazing, Dr. Marilyn Simmons Bowe. You're amazing. You're so quick, the way you pick up my metaphors and incorporate them into your thesis. It's really remarkable. I've been the host for Just Relationships for decades, and I never had anyone do exactly what you're doing.
Thank you.
You're so obviously bright. And I have lectured about the 3-part brain for centuries, it feels like. But, your way of looking at that, that obviously we think, we feel, and that survival mechanism is so acute that people feel threatened instantly, and they want to pick up an axe and not break up land, but kill somebody.
Right.
So, unfortunately, this show is over, and it has flown by, and I have very good news for people. Dr. Marilyn Simmons Bowe is coming back next week for a 2-part series. So please tune in. And meanwhile, Dr. Marilyn Simmons Bowe, B-O-W-E, wrote Motivation by the Mile, Inspiration for Every Day, I read it as everybody, but every day. Great cocktail table book. And where can people get it, Dr. Marilyn?
It is available on my website, drmarilynsimmons.com, and it's also available on Amazon. But I prefer the traffic to my website because, Jeff Bezos is Jeff Bezos.
Well put. So Dr. Marilyn Simmons, SIMMONS.com. Dr. Marilyn Simmons, SIMMONS.com. So thank you, Dr. Marilyn Simmons Bowe. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.